now. So share my screen. All right, so we left off with strings. So what I did, I was trying to hurry this morning and it got a little bit disjointed and I couldn't find my notes. So what I did was I went back and gave you the notes. So it's a little bit more clear. So if you go into, and I pushed this to GitHub, but I wouldn't clone it yet. I'm going to push everything up when I'm done at the end. So if you look at the files, the README, it's a little bit more, I gave you my notes versions because the lecture was a little bit chaotic, I think, because I was trying to hurry. So just to review, strings are just, a string literal just means like a regular string, right? And if I want to print the string or concatenate the string, I can either give the print function multiple strings, right? Or I can do the concatenation. The concatenation, if you try to do unlike data types, like if you try to concatenate a string and an int, it's going to give you the type error, right? So we'd have to use the str function in Python to coerce or convert the 42 integer to the 42 string. So the more modern way to do it is to use f strings. So f string, and then you can just pass in the variable directly into the string, just like you would in JavaScript with interpolation. The dot format is the pre-Python 3.6 way of doing it. This still works. And so does the older C-style formatting with the percent sign. And then at the end, the built-in string methods in the repository, I have links to all the different, well, not all the different, but some of the string methods that they go over. I included links to the W3 school documentation. So just in the interest of time, if we have time, I'll go through some of them, but basically it works the same way as in JavaScript. There's upper, lower, count will count the number of instances of whatever you pass it. Split will make it into an array, and so on and so forth. Okay, so those are there. So you can read these at your leisure, practice with them. And yeah, so that's it for the morning. So this afternoon, where am I? Close the stuff. So this afternoon, we're going to talk about lists and tuples. I don't want to spend too much time on them because it's just kind of a nuance of what JavaScript does. It's not terribly different. I want to spend the bulk of our time on dictionaries and functions because dictionaries are a little bit confusing. Just the syntax is a little bit different. So I want to spend the bulk of our time on dictionaries, looping through dictionaries, and functions with the default parameters and named arguments. And if we have time, we'll get to the debugging in Python. Okay. Any questions? Cool. All right, so let's talk about lists. So a list in Python is basically just an array, right? So if I have a list of, we'll call it my list, and it's just going to be a list of integers. So same as in JavaScript, I want to get to the 5, right? I want to be able to see the 5 when I run this file. So how would I do that? So how would you do
list
square
index
brackets 4?
Yeah. So I'd say my list, square brackets 4. All right. And then when I run the file, lists, I get the 5. Okay. So accessing values is pretty similar. Manipulating lists. So there's this trick to finding all of the methods that are available on an object. And again, like I said, everything in Python is an object. So this list is an object. So if I say print dir my list, and I run this, it gives me another list of all of the methods that are available on this object. Okay, so these in the beginning are called dunder methods, and we'll talk about dunder methods tomorrow, but the ones we're concerned with are the ones that don't have the underscores. Okay, so all of these are methods that are available on our list. Okay, so there's this, I imported something called pprint, which means pretty print. So just if I print this out so it's a little bit more legible, I'm gonna put a P in front of this and run it again. So we can see basically this is everything that's available on this list object. So if I wanted to add to this list, right? If I wanted to add a 6, anybody want to take a stab at which method we would use?
Append.
Append, yeah. So if I say my list, oops, my list dot append, and only 2 P's, and I would just pass in the number that I want to append, or whatever I want to append, right? And then I'll print my list again and comment this out because it's gonna make a mess. So if I save that and run the file, I get, so initially I printed out the 4th element, or the 5. I added a 6 to my list, and then you can see that it tacked on the 6. Okay. Pretty straightforward. The only difference is the wording, right? So if in JavaScript, I'm blanking on what the method is to add to a list. I don't remember what it is.
Push.
Push. Yeah. Thank you. Push. So yeah. So instead of push, it's append in Python, right? Just one more thing you have to try to remember. Any questions on this? And in the README, I have a link to all of the, not all, but some of the methods that are available on the Python list. So you can take a look at that when you're in your free time. Okay, so what is kind of different with Python is we have what's called slicing. And slicing, JavaScript has it too, but with Python, it works a little bit differently. So if I say my list, and I want to make a copy of the list, right? What I would do is pass it this kind of strange looking syntax, and it will make a copy of the list. Oops. Okay, so if I run this, it's going to print. So I've made a duplicate of the original list. Now this syntax is uses the start, and start is 0 by default. Stop is the length of whatever list it is. So the length of my list. And then the step is the interval, right? So if we want to print out every other number, the default is 1, but if we wanted to print out every other number, we would say the step is equal to 2. Okay, so the way this works is if I give this start, stop, and step, it's the same thing as if I just had the 2 colons, right? So because it's going to assume that I want to start at the beginning of the list, I want to stop at the end of the list, and I want to step through every single element. So if I run this, I should print the same thing. So if I want to start somewhere else, if I want to get, like, say, I don't want the first and second element of my list, right? So I'll leave it there. So I don't want the 1 and 2. So I want to start at 3, which is, what's the index of 3?
2.
2. So if I change my start to 2, and I want to go through the end of the list and I want all items, I would just change my start value to 2. So now when I run this, after I save the file, it's going to give me 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. If I don't want, and let me just add this. So this is inclusive, and this is exclusive, which means if I give it the index of 2, it's going to include that index as the start. So when I say 2, it takes the 3, right? It takes that item at that index. If I were to change this from length, oops, that's not what I wanted. Just delete it for now. So if I change my stop to 0, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3. So if I change it to 3, right, I change my stop value to 3. So the second index is, let me just reprint this so we can see it.
Wouldn't 2 be exclusive instead of inclusive? Because when you printed it, 2 wasn't in the array anymore.
Yeah, so 2 is the index of the value, not the number itself, right? So I'm not asking for the 2, I'm asking for the index of the 3. So remember, indexes in arrays start at 0, 1, 2. Okay. So when I say start at 2, I'm saying start at the second index. Okay, and if I say stop at the third index, right? So if I make my stop value 3 and I save the file and run it, I just get 3, right? Because the stop value is exclusive, meaning it's not included. So it goes up to that value and stops. So if I wanted to get the 4, what would I need to change the stop value to?
4.
4, yeah. Because that's going all the way up to the last index. Okay, so I get the 3 and the 4. Question so far? So I don't have to define variables, right? I'm just doing this I can say I want to start at 2, stop at 4. And if I leave the step off, it's just going to assume that I want to step 1 time. Okay, so if I 2, 4 is going to start at the second index and go up to the 4th index and stop. So I should get the same thing. Yeah. Okay, so if I wanted to print out every other number, right? So if I wanted to, let's go back to, let's say 0, and I wanted to print out every other number, what would I do?
Be like
a 2 or whatever you want to, however
so
you want to increment it by.
Change my step value and it's going to print every other number. So if I print this, I get, so it skips, did I do something wrong? No, that's right. That's right. So it takes the 1, skips the 2, prints the 3, and I probably need to go, yeah, I need to go 5 here. There we go. So we print every other number if we, because this is not inclusive, so it goes up to the 4th index and it prints every other number. Okay. Questions on this? Okay. So if you're ever asked to reverse a list in Python, this is the syntax. So if I run this, I get what? Oh, that's right, they had the 6. So this will give the list backwards. So this is saying, and I really don't know how to explain this. It's just sort of I think it's a weird syntax. It's taking the default for the start and the stop, But when you give it a negative value, it just sort of knows to go the other way. So what I do is I just memorize this syntax because it doesn't really, I mean, I don't know like what's happening behind the scenes to get this to work. But to reverse a list in Python, this is kind of the easy way to do it. And this, I think, is, I don't know of another programming language that does this. It lets you reverse a list like this.
Would you get the same result if it was like 0, 1, and -1?
So 0, 1, and -1.
Yeah, I'm just
so
curious.
that I think is going to, so you're telling it to start at the first index and stop at the second and go the opposite direction. So let's see what this does. Yeah, it gives me an empty array.
Okay.
Or I'm sorry, an empty list. So basically you're saying, you know, there's nothing to add, right? Because now maybe if you put -1, that still doesn't do anything. So yeah, so if it's empty, it assumes that it's the default value, right? So that will give you the reverse list. And just start, stop, step will come up again when we talk about ranges. So remember that whenever there's like a triplet value in Python, it usually means their start, stop, and step value. Okay. Questions about this? Okay, cool. Let's go to, tuples. Let's talk about tuples. So a tuple is a immutable list, basically. So to define a tuple, how do I define a tuple? Anybody tell me?
Well, yeah, parentheses.
Yeah, parentheses. And so if I say, if I do that, is it a tuple?
Curly brackets?
No, the parentheses
Parentheses
right.
and commas.
You need the quotations.
I
think.
don't have quotations.
Do you need a comma after the one?
I do. Are you guessing, or do you know what? That's
No, that's what it was. It wouldn't let me like print out.
okay. Okay.
Right.
So if I do this, my tuple is going to be an integer. So if I run, let me get to the right file.
It's just weird to me to let the comma hang there. That's why I'm still like questioning.
Yeah, right. But see, if I don't add the comma, it thinks that I'm trying to define an integer. So if I put in the comma and I run it again, it's going to say it's a tuple. You guys see that okay? Is that big enough?
Yeah, I can see that.
So really what defines a tuple is the comma. I'm pretty sure I don't even need the parentheses. Yeah. So what defines a tuple is the fact that there's a comma. If I put in brackets, it's going to give me an error, right? Well, maybe not. It should be. So yeah, so that makes it a list, right? So, but really the defining feature of a tuple is the comma. So if I have, let's say, Tyler, 39 and true. And let's take out the type. So I get my tuple. So what if I try to say my tuple dot append false?
It'll just tack on the false at the end.
Probably get an error. No?
Oh no, you need a comma though at the end of false.
Would you get an error?
Well, let's see what happens.
Nothing should happen, right?
So I get an attribute error.
Yeah.
So it tells me line 6 is where my error is. So I know it looks like gibberish at this point, but get in the habit of reading these error messages. they'll start to make sense after a while. So it tells me where Python crashed. Line 6, and it says my tuple.append false, attribute error, tuple object has no attribute append. Okay, because tuples are immutable. So I could do this if it were a list, but since it's a tuple, it won't let me add anything to it. Okay. Now, if I say my tuple equals my tuple plus false, will that work?
Yes.
That works. So why does that work, but append doesn't?
Isn't it because you can like add to them, but you can't like take anything away, pretty much?
I was trying to add before. I was trying to add false, and it gave me a
Yeah.
error.
Well,
It's because you're
it's 'cause
creating
outside.
Say again.
you're creating a new variable in memory.
Exactly. Perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say ID. Oops. I'll print ID my tuple and duplicate it and move it down there and run it again. Okay, so you see that this number right here, when I say ID, call the ID function, it's basically giving me the memory location or a version of the memory location where this tuple is stored. Okay, so because these numbers are different, that signifies that they're two different objects. So this one was at this memory location. I overrode this one and made a brand new tuple. So this tuple here, right, the Tyler 39 true false, is a completely different object from the one that I initially defined. So we're basically taking the variable that the tuple is assigned to and reassigning it. That's perfectly permissible. But you can't add to a tuple once it's defined. Yes, Tim.
And that's playing into what you were talking about earlier, where everything in Python is an object.
Exactly.
And so you're like creating a new address for even what's seemingly the same variable, but it's not.
Right. Because in Python, as soon as I declare a variable, Python sets aside memory for it. And it just happened to set aside that space in my RAM, right? So when I redefined it, it put it in a new memory space, a completely new object. Tyree.
Okay.
So does that new tuple, like, does the old one not exist anymore then? Or is that like, if you like tried to use my tuple, like the old one wouldn't come up at all, right?
It's gone.
Okay.
It's gone. Yeah, as soon as I reassign a variable, Python has what's called a garbage collector, and it basically goes and finds data that isn't attached to any sort of variable, and it throws it away. So yeah, so this version is gone, but I'm going to have it down here, and I'm adding to it and reassigning it to the new variable. But as soon as I do that, this connection breaks and it's gone. And it's a brand new object. So in terms of built-in functions for tuples, if I do my old dir trick, and if I run this, I get all of the methods that are available on a tuple. The only methods, and again, ignore the ones with the underscores for now. The only methods that are available on a tuple are these two, count and index. Because, well, let me ask you, why are there only two methods?
Because it's immutable.
Yeah, because they're immutable. There's not much you can do with it. Once it's defined, it's what it is. So you can count. Count will return the number of elements. So if I say count true, it'll return 1 because there's 1 true. And index will return the index of the tuple where the element is. Okay, Tyree.
Yeah, sorry, real quick. How'd you get that again? How'd you see that list?
So the dir function will give all of the methods that are available on an object.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Okay, cool. So I'm done with tuples and lists. So I'm remembering to stop the recording.